Hello and welcome to the Self-Storage Made Simple podcast. I'm your host, Thaddeus Campbell. She is Anne-Marie DeCoster. Overall, I don't even know. I was going to say badass, but that's probably not the best way to say it. In the self-storage industry, one of the women, quite frankly, who's been at the forefront of the women in self-storage, and someone I was lucky enough to meet early this year in February, met down in Sarasota, Florida, and gotten to know over the course of the year, had opportunities to be involved in different masterminds and also in a couple of different conferences where we've crossed paths, and just have an absolute tremendous amount of respect for not only her track record, but her knowledge. And more importantly, I love people that are insightful. In other words, they don't just say stuff randomly. They say stuff backed by facts, backed by actual data. So Anne-Marie, really excited to have you on the podcast, and welcome.
Well, with that kind of an introduction, I don't think I can live up to it, Thad. So we might as well end here because, wow, I want to meet this woman.
That's too funny. Well, we're going to set out to prove everybody wrong. And I've heard you speak before, so I know this is going to be very easy to live up to that standard over the course of the next half hour. I always start the podcast the same. Self-storage, such a niche industry, such a quirky industry, and really such a great group of human beings. I'm always fascinated to know how people found themselves getting into this beautiful asset class we all exist in.
Mm-hmm. The only people who come into it straightforward are second generation.
100%.
You know, they usually, at this point in the history of self-storage, they're able to say, oh, I am so blessed. I will love this. Money is good. Business is good. That wasn't so, 12 years ago, 15 years ago and prior. They're like, oh, storage. Like, hey, what's the matter? Don't you like money?
Yep.
But actually, I started my life as a consultant with Booz Allen and Hamilton, and spent 5 years toiling away there, learning all my skills, and then left and have been on my own mostly ever since. Entered storage about 20 years ago, literally when someone was leaning up against a counter at his church where he was leading the remodeling program. And he said, I need help. And the person behind the desk said, I know who can help you.
Oh, that's great.
And he called his daughter. His daughter called me. I called him. We went out to lunch the next day. And the day after that, I started writing his business plans to bring storage to Hong Kong, Guam, Nagasaki, Tokyo,
Wow.
Beijing, Shanghai. And that was incredible work because he was already building what he called new era self-storage. And this was, like I said, it was around the turn of the millennium. long time ago. His facilities were facilities of the year. The gorgeous new facilities with beautiful architecture and smart design were in Honolulu. It was always his plan to exit via sale to a REIT.
Yeah.
And he did that successfully with each asset one at a time. And the last one sold for $32 million. I'm like, oh, Greg, we did well. That was Greg Greisenbeck with Hugo Pacific Development. I worked for him for a number of years and basically, learned everything about the industry from concept to exit of properties, but also the operations, because the magic happens between closings, right? You close on the property, you operate it, and then you close when you sell it. And that's when the magic happens. And so I was up to my elbows in hiring and firing and KPIs and keeping on top of things week by week by week. We had managers of the year. We had managers, this is back, 20 years ago, who were making over $100,000 a year because they maxed out every monthly bonus, every quarterly bonus, every annual bonus. And we were so happy to give them that money because the more we gave them, the more we knew we were making. And so as the pie gets bigger, you can divide it up with people and everybody works out well. It was an interesting lesson for the industry to learn. For instance, with revenue management, RevMan was not a thing in our industry until Extra Space made it a thing, and then went on the conference touring gig and shared their first formula, which is first rent raise after 9 months, and then every 4 months thereafter. And they always kept them at that point in the single digits.
Yeah.
And by the time 20 to 22 months have gone by, they would have moved out anyway.
Right.
They saved because of the rent raise, but statistically speaking, they were going to move out
Right.
anyway. And Extra Space has all the data and all of the people. I'm always impressed with their people. They're so smart that they've done all the testing. And so if you can figure out what Extra Space is doing and emulate them in a modified way, you're probably onto something. I'm not a fan of the pricing games that are being played right now. I don't think it's good for the industry, a race to the bottom. So, we'll say the record is not perfect, but the 80/20 rule still applies.
I was laughing. I was reading CubeSmart's third quarter report the other day, and I can't remember the exact quote that the president said, but it was the best Christopher Marr. He said something to the effect that we're basically said it very eloquently, but yeah, we're cutting rates when people come in and we're raising them a lot and they're not leaving. That was essentially, if you read between the lines of what the quote said, but he said it in a much better way. But we are, and as you brought this up, so we'll go down this road early. I was going to talk about it a little later, but this is what we're dealing with right now with the REITs, right? You're dealing with a strategy where they're cutting rates on the front end and making it up on the back end with ECRIs, with existing customer rate increases. It's been interesting to me. I have a couple people on the podcast recently who you're familiar with as well, Jesse Lamb and Bo Agnello, and both have kind of addressed this head on from an operations standpoint, right? They're both head of operations of their particular organizations. And is there going to be a long-term effect? And for you, someone with as much experience and intelligence as you have, how long can you get away as an industry with saying, hey, come in the door for $80, but a year and a half from now, you're going to be paying 240?
Yeah. I think it's disingenuous. And I think people are hardwired to recognize sincerity. And when there is a repeated story being told about that kind of an experience, it's not good for any industry where it occurs. So long term, I don't think it's great. And I will also say that there are portfolios who have emulated that practice, and they did well on the financial returns in the quarters that immediately followed. However, they have suffered reputational harm in the form of one-star reviews that's having a longer term effect. And so they're having to crawl out from under that kind of collateral damage. I think, if you're competing with large companies who are using that strategy, you have to respond. But I think you will be better served by making it extraordinarily clear to your consumer who's becoming your tenant. This is an introductory rate, and you'll have this $49 unit, this rent for 3 months. And then in the fourth month or the beginning of the fifth month, the rent will go up to and state the amount. I have seen people putting guarantees on their website and in their leases that they won't raise the rate for a year. And that probably has some currency with the consumer, but it doesn't necessarily fill the space, and it doesn't necessarily improve NOI. You can fill the space by lowering the rent, but then your NOI continues to suffer. Or you cannot lower the rent in hopes of, helping that wonderful number in the lower right-hand corner, but it might not be a price that's competitive at that moment. So, we're largely between a rock and a hard spot, and things will be better for all of us when the housing market starts moving, because that's about 20% of our demand. And there's thoughts that it will start moving, when the interest rates went down and the mortgage rates did not.
Yeah.
Of course, we got no bump. And there are plenty of people who think that, sooner or later, people are just going to have to accept the current economic, the macroeconomic conditions and move anyway. And I think that those are people who are not looking at the quantity of money that is there to be divvied up.
Yeah.
And if a family only makes X and a house now, 2X is their budget, they're going to stay where they are. Whether they're happy or unhappy, whether they're cramped or not, they're going to stay where they are. It's just an economic reality for many people in the United States. And there are studies on this are hard to find, but it's the concept of living paycheck to paycheck. There's not a hard quantitative measure of it, but there's a measure of sentiment. And I've seen a study that goes by generation, and it's striking that in each of the generations that's currently active renting self-storage, from baby boomers to millennials to Gen X to Gen Z, 1/2 to 2/3 feel that they're living paycheck to paycheck. That's, that is a psychological reality, and there's a great deal of fact behind the premise that they can't get a bigger place. Now, affordable storage is a great option for them.
It was interesting. Armand Agajanian, who's constantly posting on LinkedIn with really great data, put something up.
I can't keep up with how much
it's impressive. I'm trying to be like him, but I can't do it.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. I just let him do it, and I go like his post. But he put something up. Two things I wanted to reference that he talked about that kind of going along with what you're saying. One is the average age of a homeowner now is like 39 years old, right? Like it and that's just proving out the fact that the access to buying a house is. And the second statistic in that was, I think the average age of a second time home buyer is in the late 60s, right? Like, think about that. For someone to buy their second house is like in their 60s. That's hard to fathom, right? Because again, for us in the industry and storage, we rely on the movement of people. And so the facts are the facts, right? The people are not buying houses as quickly, and they're certainly not moving again anywhere near as quickly. And you nailed it. At a certain point, the financial reality is the financial reality. You have to get approved by the bank for the mortgage. And if your income doesn't meet the demand, you can't. The flip side of that is, are we going to get a little bit of salvation from millennials, and especially as Gen Z starts to come of age, people who are going to rent longer term but move more frequently? Is that kind of going to, are we going to get to fill the gap a little bit with that group of people?
Well, it's interesting because I travel all around the country and I have conversations everywhere I go, not only because I enjoy people, but also it's a great opportunity to just take the pulse.
Yeah.
And so I was at the Family Office Super Summit at Key Biscayne just last week, and I was talking with, there were, first generation, second generation, even third generation families attending. And so, I could talk to people of many different ages. Yeah. And I remember talking with someone on the cusp of millennial Gen X. They define themselves differently, but he was early 30s. And he thought it was absolutely bonkers that people his age would use self-storage to supplement their lifestyle. He did not know anyone who did that. And he lived in a large urban area. And then I look, for instance, at my sons and their friends. They're 25 to 30, and they do use self-storage to supplement their lifestyle. They also use it when they're moving because they downsize and they upsize based on where they're moving. So they've become, a good self-storage customers. The best self-storage customer is the one that moves the stuff in, puts it on auto pay, and forgets it. Storing memories. And I always thank those people when I hear those stories. We love you. Yes, our industry loves you.
That's too funny.
But so I think it's too early, really, to draw any kind of fact-based conclusions on that statement. But we are certainly going to find people who use it to supplement their lifestyle because they know they can't rent more space in their living quarters, and self-storage is less expensive. There are also, even though lots of companies are calling people back into the office, there are a whole lot of people who won't go, and those will be people who will be working for themselves. And when you work for yourself, you need a place to work. And
total sidetrack. Go ahead. I was going to say total sidetrack. I'm interested to know how much of some of these big companies calling people back to work is how much investment they have in commercial office space because quite frankly the performance numbers don't back up that desire to have people come back to the office. Almost every big corporate, big business owner that I've ever spoken to, their employees have fared better working from home and their productivity's gone up. So it's a weird phenomenon to me. Total sidetrack there. I want to get back into storage a little bit. And one of the
Well, let me make one
Go
comment
ahead,
on
go ahead.
that. I think a lot of those companies, they're going to find someone else eating their lunch because there are incredible CEOs running phenomenal
Yeah,
companies in every industry in the United
yeah,
States. They are first generation Indian. They're born
yeah,
here and they're running completely
yeah,
remote and they know how to do it and they do it well and they know how to tap into the global mobile skilled
yeah,
labor force that has been developing for decades but really got turned on in COVID because you were able to separate individuals from
yeah,
companies in COVID. So you could hire one person instead of a whole
yeah,
team in India or Pakistan or Costa Rica or Ukraine, not Ukraine anymore. Unfortunately, they really suffered from
yeah,
not macroeconomic trends, but macro political
yeah.
trends.
No, your point is very
But yeah,
well
so
taken,
I,
though.
I think, yeah, I just think you got to roll with the times, and remote work is a huge asset.
So it's a perfect segue to the question I was going to ask anyway, which is you talked earlier about when you first got into storage and you guys were building these facilities and how you created this investment in the employees, right? Someone could listen, you were making $100,000 managing a self storage facility in
2004.
2004. That was a lot of money, right?
Yeah, it was.
Um, that investment in people, as we've gone to 2024 and we're seeing more hub and spoke model, we're seeing some fully remote become more of a thing. How do we, in this age of technology, which, as you said, if you're not implementing technology, you're not going to compete. How do you
Yeah.
marry that desire to keep employees motivated and happy and incentivized, but removing them from the physical structure in a lot of cases of the storage facility?
Yeah. There's an old guard and there's a new guard. And old guard managers are not faring well in the transition. And if you leave an old guard manager, I'm talking about someone who has 10 or 20 years experience managing a self-storage facility, uh, what I have seen multiple times is bad technology implementations. Good technology, bad implementation, because they don't want it to work.
Yeah.
And they have, excellent customer service is huge, and it doesn't have to be rendered on site. It can be achieved through some of the great technology that's available these days. I don't know if you've gone into some facilities recently that use the video
Yeah.
conferencing, but I just used the opportunity to test it out when my family had need for storage. I was at a hotel in Florida, and there's a whole house of things that is going to need to be taken care of, and part of it's going to need to be sold. And so I was asking for an exterior entry unit where we could sell motorcycles from, so you can meet the prospect on
Yeah.
site, and interior climate control where we're going to have to put things that we can't deal with
Yeah.
yet. And so I was shopping for a lot of different things, and I will tell you that the best service I got was with the two-way video.
Yeah. Our friend James Hatfield bringing that technology into the industry, right?
And so fortunate is the owner who knows what to look for in that kind of a hire. And one of the things that I share with people is make sure that the candidates know it is video first, that they have to be willing to be on video because not everybody
Yeah.
is. And make sure that they love technology, that when they encounter a new piece of technology, they eat it up. Because if you don't like technology and learning technology, it's going to be a much less pleasant job and you're not going to do it as well. So if you can hire those people and have them work in an environment that they like, whether that's in an office or in a home office, and allow them to do all the managerial responsibilities, take care of all of those. Plus, you have your boots on the ground, and you have a strategy that includes technology and people for access, so that I'm a believer in always having your units locked. There are places in the country where vacant units are left unlocked. Just not my style. I just think it invites homelessness and critters and a lot of other things I don't want on site. So that's a problem that I always want solved. But there are, I don't know, you think there are half a dozen ways to solve that problem now, Thaddeus? What do you think? Half a
Yeah,
dozen?
there's more technology coming into the industry now. It's crazy.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah.
mean, there's 8 different people making remote key locks, right? That I can think of off the top of my head. So
So do you remember the from one year to the next what appeared on the trade show floor? And that was like
100%.
it was 2023, wasn't
It,
it?
it
When
was
all of
literally
those,
last year. It was like 5 different
yeah.
locks that you could go get.
Wow.
Yeah.
Where these
I
come
almost
from? This is
I almost
cool.
started feeling sorry for some of the people that they were putting millions of dollars into the technology, and if you missed it, you missed it, right? Because we know there's not going to be 8 make it into widespread use in the industry. But
No,
yeah,
no.
the difference. So I'm new in this industry. I started in storage in August of 2021. My first trade show was
Mhm,
Orlando of 22. The difference
mhm.
between Orlando of 22 and New Orleans of 23, those are the 2 spring shows. Forget
Right.
about the Vegas shows, which are that's I'm speaking SSA, not ISS. The amount
Mm.
of technology on the trade show floor in a couple of years is hard to fathom, quite frankly.
Yes,
In
yes,
fact,
yes.
as I say that, Janice, which is always front and center at the SSA show when you walk in the doors to the trade show,
Mhm.
this past show in Vegas in September was not their doors. It was the keyless entry. That was their big, what you saw when you walked through
Right.
was no longer a
Mhm.
door, it was a keyless entry lock.
Mhm. You're right. You're right.
So I guess that, point being, if you're not keeping up with technology, it's hard to And another thing I
Yes.
wanted to bring up with you, I was reading through Public Storage's third quarter report.
Mhm.
Their net operating income as a percentage of gross was like 77 plus percent.
Wow.
Can you imagine? Hard to fathom. Like I had to read it like 4 times, right? Their
Just read this
expenses
right.
were less than 25% of their gross. And I guess the reason I'm bringing this up is it's economy of scale, obviously, right? They have so many
Yes.
more stores than anybody else,
That's one thing.
but
Hmm.
they're operating with technology and using technology to have hub and spoke where they're not manned facilities all the time.
Hmm.
They're able to bring a lot of listen, you can have one person sitting in an office answering calls from 30 different facilities, and that person's active all day instead of having somebody sitting in an office on site
Watching
where they might get three,
Netflix.
four, 5 people in the course of a day, right? So
Maybe.
how is somebody this is a long-winded way of asking a question, but I
Hmm.
promise there's a question here. How does someone who's smaller compete?
Hmm.
How do you stay if public storage can operate a facility at 77 plus percent net operating income to gross? By default, if I'm trying to buy a new facility or if I'm trying to build a new facility, I can't compete with them as far as what I can afford to pay for it unless I can drive my expenses down that low, which is, by the way, really, really hard to do. To get 25% is pushing it, right? We're typically
Oh
underwriting at
yeah. Get
35%.
30% these days. Yeah.
Very
I
challenging.
mean, the price of insurance is going up. It has gone up so significantly that that makes that expense ratio very
Yeah.
difficult to maintain. And there are fixed expenses. They're printed by the printer in the sky that you can do nothing about. That's your property tax. Good luck getting that decreased. Your insurance, and your merchant fees. There are things that controlling those is very difficult, especially given that PMSs and payment processing companies are buying each other and locking you
Yeah.
in to what they offer instead of you being able to pick and
Right.
choose. So, okay, that I think that there are a couple things that are super important because you named two things that public storage has going for it, both economies of scale and they're operating the way they're operating their model for
Yep.
management, which includes a lot of remote. Uh, which is different from extra spaces, by the way, but we'll, pin that and come back to it if you want. Uh, However, there's a third thing, and that is their facilities are not small.
Yeah.
And to achieve the kind of expense ratio that makes this industry so attractive, you can't buy a puddle of
No.
storage and think that it's going to be a cash producing, appreciating asset,
No.
because that puddle of storage will be a software
Yeah.
instance, and you will have to pay for an instance for each
Yeah.
puddle, unless you convince a software company that, my 10,000 square feet here and my 15,000 square feet there and my, 4,000 square feet a mile away are run as satellites. They're kind of onto that, and some of them have some flexibility, but it doesn't work that
Right.
way. And so if you end up with those three, for instance, those three physical locations, and maybe you convince them to have two instances instead of one, that's still double the
Yeah.
cost with a lot lower revenue that's coming in, because the small facilities can't generate that kind of revenue. And even if it's that, one of those beautiful finds where you can expand and add space, you're not going to do that if the demand isn't there. And so, will demand come back? Yeah, because everything is cyclical, but you don't know if that's going to be in a year or 5 years. And how does that fit into your investors' demands? You know, you may put yourself in the position where you're having to flip properties every 3 to 5 years
Yep.
just to keep your investors happy. And where's your money? You came into this to build wealth and to have financial freedom. And many people in this industry, as you pointed out, are wonderful people. And so they came into it to serve
Yep.
and to make humanity better instead of worse. Well, if you've, sort of created the job for yourself of raising capital, deploying it, uh, grinding between closings so that you can then return the return that your investors want, so they'll keep investing with you, where is your wealth accumulation?
It's such an interesting thing for me, having got into the industry at an amazing time, but probably the worst time for someone to start in the industry in August of 2021, where we were like riding the amazing high of the COVID boom.
Well,
For those who don't
I don't
know,
know, 2009 would have been a worse time.
yeah, listen, there could have been worse times, I guess. However, what was interesting for me is I was working for a ground up developer at the time, and we were underwriting. Listen, you could underwrite almost any piece of raw dirt to a refi cash out in
Right.
2021. The reality,
Guess
and I
what?
didn't know any different. I'd never been in commercial real estate. I didn't even know what a refi cash out meant, right? Um,
Right.
all those projects that were starting to be developed in 2021, man, they're facing a very different reality. And I think
There.
your point's very well taken. And it's going to be interesting to see how it affects the overall storage market. Is it a case of rich get richer? Because these developers that are finalizing projects now, are they going to be able to lease up and get to an economic listen? If we thought being 36 months on lease up to get to economic stability was being conservative. I see Extra Space just sent me a report on a site the other day where they're not expecting economic lease up for 60 months. How do you survive as a developer, especially when interest rates are way higher, land costs are higher? Are we
Well, an interest rate is the clinch. That's the
it's
clincher.
it's a killer.
Uh,
You're 10% construction debt versus you were getting 5.5% in 2021, 2022 before the Fed jump rates. Again, I'm going to find a question in here. Are we going to see, like you said, going forward, very hard for someone to accumulate properties? Throwing in that idea we talked about with Public Storage and Extra and CubeSmart, and there's some other big players in the game. There's some very big private players in the game now. Can a smaller person compete in this environment right now? I guess that's my question. Are you going to be able to see somebody accumulating 30, 40, 50, 60 stores? Are they going to be able to get to that level of scale?
well, and so are we talking about that, which is really private equity, or are we talking about the entrepreneur who, maybe it's 10 that they get to? Because I can definitely see a path for that, as long as you're geographically
Got
concentrated
it.
and you have to educate yourself. You have to Do your software homework ahead of time. Pick your software and understand how it is you can combine locations within price points. XPS has an offering of remote management. And if you know nothing about operations, that's something to look into because it's a lot less expensive than having a human being who is an American do this. But it's a lot more expensive than having a VA do it, who is in another country and works at an entirely different level of pay. And oh, by the way, they don't have overtime rules. So if you have a VA who can work 12 hours a day and happily do it because they are rising out of poverty and they're giving opportunity to everyone in their family, more power to you. But how do you have the right KPIs and technology in place so that, to know what they're doing? That's another challenge. So you have to embrace technology in a smart way, do your homework by talking to people who are using the technology, listen to podcasts like this so that you can learn about the different approaches and go to the trade shows and spend time checking out those locks, checking out the different PMSs, doing demos. And as you do them and as you talk to people, you learn more and more scenarios to ask about.
I'm going to
certainly talk to the marketing experts because technical SEO is essential these days. And if you don't have a marketing provider, a website provider who does that well, you are not going to appear where people are searching for storage.
So you see an opportunity there for the entrepreneur to come in. Maybe not a great time for PE that hasn't already achieved some scale to get to 50, 60, 70 stores. I had Bo Agnello on from Go Store the other day, and they just merged with Snapbox. And he said, hey, we merged because we felt like if you didn't have 100 stores, you weren't going to make it.
Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that there's not a play for them. There is a play for them. And most of them are smart enough to figure out what kind of facilities to buy so they have a portfolio that will sell. And I'll tell you that puddles of storage don't sell. Portfolios of puddles of 10,000, 6,000, 15,000. They don't sell. There's no buyer. There's no buyer who wants to buy those. The smart money hire smart people and they find a way. This is a great industry. It has been for a long time. It's not going away. Our penetration among the American consumer continues to grow year by year. It's not supercharged growth, but supercharged growth is hard to manage. It's steady growth. Steady growth is easier to manage.
Listen,
there's a play for any kind of business person in storage, but you have to be realistic about what you're doing. The person who's entering storage right now, who wants to buy 40,000 net rentable square feet in one state and 60,000 in another and 75,000 in a third, that's going to be really hard. That's going to be hard to manage, hard to do, because you're going to want to do that with technology and you don't know operations yet. That's not a wise move. But you find a market that's solid, you find your first, that's a reasonable size, and then you look around that and concentrate. And maybe you end up with 2 or 3 clusters, but you grow from one to the next, not in 3 different areas at the same time. So it takes strategy, it takes discipline, it takes knowing what your buy box is and sticking to it. It takes a lot of no to get to the right yes. You have to say no a lot of times. And that doesn't make you negative. That makes you disciplined.
Listen, I got another hour's worth of questions that I could ask you, which is a perfect break. It's been over 30 minutes. I try and stick to the 30-minute mark. Love for this podcast to be digestible, but also honor your time. I'd love to have you back, hopefully next year. I didn't even get into the fact that you're now working closely with James Reed at Storco Storage. Didn't even get a chance to talk about that. Just saw the congratulations are in order. Just saw your LinkedIn job changed, which didn't really change. You're still running Anne-Marie DeCoster Consulting, but working with James Reed closely at Storco, one of my very close friends in the industry and an all-around great human being. Really would love to have you come back on. I want to talk about a particular topic with you, which is the mastermind deal. You brought up the family office club down in Florida. And I know that you've been a frequent attendee, not only of masterminds, but SSA events. Trade shows are essentially a form of a mastermind as well. So hopefully can get you to come back on again here sometime in the near future.
That'll be great. And there are a lot of good things to come with James Reed's family of companies, Investa Capital, BBI Constructors, and Storco. Got some great things ahead in 2025, and I believe for many years after that. So.
Love it. I'm going to look forward to bringing you back on to talk more about it, because James has been ducking me for a year. I've been trying to get him on the podcast since February of 2024. So I'll stay on him, but maybe you can put a bug in his ear for me and help me out. He'll run with me. I've run with him in San Diego, St. Louis, Las Vegas, New York City. Like, he'll go for a run with me. He just won't come on the podcast, which is kind of funny.
You got to bring your microphone.
You know what? That's a great deal. The next time I'm at an event I was hoping to get down to Key Biscayne, actually, to the Family Office Club. I had to miss this one for family stuff. But listen, can't thank you enough. You proved exactly what I thought, that you're an absolute badass. Your understanding of the industry is second to nobody. So really can't thank you enough for coming on with us and sharing so much insight.
As long as I'm not a bad ad, I'm glad to hear it.
You are the furthest thing from a bad ad. You're a great ad to the podcast. So I appreciate you coming on. Listen, that's it for this week's episode of the Self-Storage Made Simple podcast. We really appreciate it. If you took anything of value from Anne-Marie, please hit the like button. Subscribe to our channel. You'll get updates for everyone that's upcoming on the podcast. And we look forward to an amazing 2025. Anne-Marie, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you. God bless you, Thad.
Would be remiss if I didn't say thank you to PropRise, our sponsor for the podcast. We love those guys. They're supercharging the self-storage industry, helping you deal source. Check them out at www.proprise.io. We will see you guys next week.